Welcome to mrhorrortale, where we tell scary stories that really happened. There is nothing that raises more warnings than an abandoned place. When we hear about them, we know that there is likely to be danger, and that we should not go there for nothing. But something inherent in human nature makes us want to pursue this danger, to be curious about it, and to ignore all these red flags. In the following stories, we will see three people who, in one way or another, ignored the red flags and went to abandoned places, only to discover that the world was much bigger than they imagined. To ensure you don't miss out on other horror contents, remember to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell. Story 1. The House from the Childhood. Hey, my name is Evan, and what I'm about to tell you now may seem a little unbelievable, but I need you to open your mind to what you are about to hear. This is the story of how as simple as a simple remodeling of an abandoned house with my family turned into an encounter with the unknown. My family consists of my wife and 2 children. Up to this point, we were renting in the city, but our lease had run out, and to be honest with you, we couldn't afford to pay a new rent. My wife and I decided to move back to the old house of my parents, who had died several years ago. Make no mistake, my relationship with them was pretty good, but for something I couldn't remember, I didn't want to go anywhere near that house. I don't remember having a bad childhood in that house, and that's what worries me. I don't remember almost anything about that house, but I felt very uncomfortable being in it. We arrived before dark and settled in. The atmosphere was quite good. We were all very happy to have a fresh start. The house looked cozy, with a huge fireplace in the living room. We had a simple dinner. We would start remodeling in the morning. As the night progressed, the temperature outside the house dropped, and the wind blew hard through the trees. We decided to play board games with the kids, but while we were playing, we heard knocking at the door. At first, we thought it was the wind or some animal in the woods, but the knocking became louder and more persistent. I approached the door to see what was causing the noise. My kids were pretty scared, but I told them that it always happens, that they were normal in these kind of abandoned places, but that I was still going to see what it was. At first, I peeked through the door, but I didn't see anything. So we continued with our games. The atmosphere in the cabin was becoming increasingly tense. The lights began to flicker and suddenly went out completely. We were plunged into total darkness. To tell you the truth, both my wife and I were absolutely terrified. We tried to calm the children as best we could, but it was becoming very difficult, as we couldn't even calm each other down. From one second to the next, the house became much colder. I felt a shiver run down my spine. The only source of light came from the fireplace, but it was already fading. As we tried to light candles, we heard whispers rustling from the shadows. The voices were barely audible, but they were loud enough for everyone to hear. As we walked through the rooms, I felt something watching us. As we reached the master bedroom, the door slammed shut behind us. We tried to open it, but it was no use. It was as if the door was sealed. Suddenly, a dark shadow appeared in a corner. It had no definite shape, just a dark mass moving slowly towards us. We shouted and struggled with the door, but nothing. It was still completely closed. The shadow was getting closer and closer, and I could feel pressure in the air, as if it was becoming more and more suffocating with each passing second. My children were crying, and my wife, in a panic, was banging on the door with me as hard as she could. In desperation, we managed to open the door and escape from the room. We ran into the living room and closed the door behind us. The shadow didn't seem willing to follow us for now. We stood in the living room, trembling with fear and not understanding what had just happened. We decided to leave the house and look for help, but when we opened the front door, we were confronted with a completely different landscape. The forest was shrouded in a dense fog, and we couldn't see more than a few meters ahead. There were no road signs or lights from other nearby cabins. Not knowing where to go or what to do, we ran without direction, hoping to find some sign of civilization. The fog enveloped every step we took. Before I knew it, my wife and son were gone. I wanted to go back to look for them. I wanted to retrace my steps and face whatever was behind me, but I couldn't do it. My daughter was still in my arms, so I decided to just keep running while covering her face, hoping to find someplace to leave her so I could look for the rest of my family. Unlike my daughter, I could see everything. As we moved forward, we heard distant laughter and murmurs that seemed to come from everywhere. I felt watched, haunted by something invisible. As I looked into the forest, I could see shadows running everywhere, coming and going, surrounding us. After what seemed like an eternity, we reached the road, but it was completely empty. I saw a strange figure standing in front of us. It was a tall, thin silhouette, with glowing eyes staring at us. I froze, unable to look away. The figure began to slowly approach. This was the shadow from before. The mist thickened around it. We could hear his light footsteps, but could not see his features clearly. We felt the air grow colder as it got closer. The figure stopped and began to mutter incomprehensible words. They were the same words we heard in the abandoned house. The laughter and whispers we had heard earlier intensified. The fog grew thicker, enveloping us completely. I left my hand on my daughter's eyes and closed mine as well, fearing what would come next. With my eyes closed, I heard a violent roar and a light rapidly approaching us. That noise. I knew that noise. When I opened my eyes, my wife and son were in front of us, on top of the truck. I climbed in with my daughter while the figure was still approaching. My wife tried to start the truck, but it wouldn't start. We looked out the window and the shadow was gone. But before we could calm down, the van started to move from side to side, as if someone was shaking it. Whatever was attacking us had a lot of force, so much that it was about to knock the van over. My wife managed to start the truck and accelerated as fast as she could, leaving all the fog behind us. When I turned around and looked out the window, I could see the shadow materialize out of the fog once again, walking to the center of the road and staring at us as we ran away. We never returned to that house. With some time, we were able to get a new rent at a very good price. I may not remember the things I went through as a kid in that house, but now I remember why I didn't want to go there. My memory may not have wanted to relive my childhood in that house, but my body knew what it was getting into. My body knew that no matter what, I didn't have to go into that abandoned house. Story 2. The Kindergarten. For as long as I can remember, I've always loved horror. I'm one of those people who spends a lot of time watching urban exploration videos, fantasizing about someday being able to do it myself. With this in mind, you can imagine how excited I got when I heard a classmate at school tell me that she had encountered a ghost in the abandoned kindergarten. I'll give you some context. In the school year of the school I attend to, it was decided to start building a kindergarten next to our school gym. The place was not too big, only 2 floors. The construction progressed quickly, but a few months after a change in the school's management, it was completely abandoned. To be honest, it's not like the place is haunted or anything. It feels abandoned and half-built, but many students go to explore it. I was excited to be one of those students, since they used to be much older than me, and they always went in big groups. Also, and most important, we were going to go at night. The girl was new and had a reputation for being a liar, so no one believed her story. Some were scared and paid attention, but said they would never go check it out. I, on the other hand, understood what it was like to be new, and that nobody was interested in what you have to say, so I gave her the benefit of the doubt. Besides, I must admit that I felt an adrenaline rush running through my body. If it was true, I wanted to live this encounter. The girl was very shy, a few words. Her short curly brunette hair was lost in her height, which was almost 6 feet tall. For a moment I thought that this story was an excuse to fit in with her new classmates, but she told it in such a terrifying way that I believed her. After digging a little deeper into her experience, I was more determined than ever, and to my utter surprise, The girl agreed to go with me. Anyway, I didn't think too much about it, and when night came, we entered the school through a broken fence in the back and headed for the haunted kindergarten. I have to admit that the kindergarten was quite big and far from the school. Only a new student could stray that far and end up there. As we entered the place and turned on the light, I couldn't help but think of one word: disappointment. I mean, yes, the place was abandoned. It looked very dirty and unkempt, as you would expect an abandoned place to look. But aside from that, we went into one of the classrooms upstairs, and it looked exactly like any of the classrooms I attended every day. There was nothing strange in this abandoned classroom, much less a ghost, as she said. I turned to look at my classmate with the most mocking look possible, but my face quickly changed. The girl, who was then suffering from intense contractions all over her body, was closing the door. When her gaze landed on me, any questions I might have asked choked in my throat as I saw what was happening. The young girl, no more than 14 years old, began to drool bile so continuously that she seemed to melt. Her neck opened up like a worn sweater as her head sank deeper and deeper into the bowels of her body. Stunned and paralyzed with fear, I began to watch as her belly explode, leaving blood that seemed to dry instantly as it hit the abandoned classroom floor. Slowly, her head emerged from the newly formed hole in her navel. Judging from the direction the head came out, it was clear that she could not see me, as her eyes were pointed towards the floor. However, her face quickly straightened up as her body leaned back and used her hands to brace herself on the ground, sort of like a spider with her head sticking out of the center of her body. During those few seconds that seemed like an eternity, all I could think about was my family, my pet, a German shepherd, only 3 years old, my friends, who had invited me to play online games this very night. A huge sadness took over my body with the feeling that I would never see them again, that my life was going to end for no reason. When I saw her gaze pointed at my body, I realized exactly what was going on. This abandoned kindergarten. It was nothing more than an abandoned kindergarten. There were no ghosts, no possessions, no serial killers hiding behind some classroom. This was nothing more than a trap that this being had set for me, taking advantage of my innocence and curiosity. I immediately understood that I was nothing more than food, caught in the nets of a predator beyond my comprehension. In a survival impulse, I desperately ran to the window, while listening to the inhumanly accelerated footsteps that were quickly catching up to me. Somehow, I made it in time to throw myself out the window, and from then on everything went blank. When I awoke a few weeks later, I saw my grandmother desperately telling the doctor that I had opened my eyes. My story was greeted with worried looks and malicious questions about whether I had tried any drugs. That day, the only thing that saved me was the fact that the school caretaker lived in a small house next to the kindergarten. The man didn't see when the girl and I entered, but he heard my screams as I fell and found me on the floor, alone. From that day on, I gave up my dream of doing urban explorations, and I insisted so much to my parents that they ended up changing me to another school. I never set foot in any of its classrooms again, and from what my former schoolmates told me, neither did the curly-haired girl. Story 3. The Carnival. Have you ever been to a carnival? Well, who hasn't? As a kid, I always loved them and drove my parents crazy to take me there. I got to know the amusement park that was just a few miles from my house almost by heart, and even then, I kept going and going. Once I grew up, I admit I stopped going for a few years. Eventually, it started to seem a bit boring. I guess that's part of growing up. However, it didn't help that I knew all the attractions by heart. I came to believe that I would never set foot in a carnival again, that maybe I had been so many times that I would never be attracted to it again. But time would prove me wrong. I was a freshman in college, and my friends wanted to use the break to go to a carnival a few miles from campus. I knew that amusement park. That was the amusement park of my childhood. I admit that I would have liked to go again. The only problem was that my friends were not going to enjoy the attractions, since that amusement park had closed a few years ago, and it was abandoned. Once my friends found out that I knew that place inside out, they insisted more fervently that I go with them. I'll be honest, they didn't have to try very hard to convince me. Part of me was excited. I was attracted to going to an abandoned amusement park. The day we were supposed to go, a friend gave us a ride in his car. Everyone was happy and joking about the abandoned amusement park. Maybe that's why they didn't see what I saw a few blocks away. When we stopped at a traffic light, off to the side, on the sidewalk, someone was staring at us. It was a clown. It was an identical copy of the clown from the movie Terrifier. He was a combination of a clown and a mime. His smile was huge and revealed his broken and bloody teeth. Unlike the original clown, his costume was much more bloody and broken. This man definitely saw the movie many times, as he mimicked it to perfection. When he realized I was staring at him, he just waved at me. I decided to ignore him. I was going to have a good time tonight, and no teenager trying to scare me was going to ruin it. Once we entered the abandoned place, one of my friends began to film everything they saw, while the rest walked around with curiosity. The place had been abandoned for a few years, so it wasn't too vandalized. At that moment, I remember wanting to explore everything. But one place in particular caught my attention the most. It was at that moment that I almost ran to the House of Mirrors. The House of Mirrors was a maze of corridors and rooms filled with distorting mirrors. It was amusing to see our deformed figures, and we couldn't help but laugh at our grotesque appearances. However, as we moved deeper into the house, the laughter began to fade, and an uncomfortable feeling came over me. As we walked down the crooked hallways, I began to notice that the mirrors seemed to reflect something other than our distorted images. At first, I thought it was my imagination, but then I saw him between the mirrors. It was the clown. The clown that was watching us from afar was in this place with us. At first, I thought it was just a teenager trying to scare us from a distance, but now he entered the abandoned place with us, and I couldn't help but think, what if the danger was real? I turned to tell my friends, but when I did, the hallway behind me was empty. I was alone in the House of Mirrors. I walked slowly, looking around me as the mirrors continued to show glimpses of that creepy clown. No matter where I looked, he always seemed to be nearby, as if he was following me. My heart was pounding, and my steps became more hurried. I wanted to get out of there as soon as possible. Finally, I came to a room full of mirrors that surrounded me on all sides. I didn't know which way to go, and I was trapped in a glass maze. It was then that I saw something much worse. The clown was still there, but now he had a huge hammer in his hand. Once in front of me, I surrendered to my fear and put myself on guard to face the clown. I didn't know where he was coming from. Out of nowhere, the clown started running and slammed into my direction. Some mirrors broke, and suddenly, I saw my own reflection in the mirror, and behind me was the clown. I turned around to confirm that he was behind me, but before I could defend myself, the clown put his huge, cold hands on my neck, throwing me against one of the mirrors. Before I could recover from the blow, the clown was on top of me, laughing his head off in a frantic manner and scratching my face with his filthy fingernails. The pain was just too much, and my face burned in a fierce sting as I felt him tearing chunks of skin off my face. Every move I made to protect myself was in vain, as his cold, twisted hands held me with supernatural strength. For a moment I surrendered. I was at the mercy of what this psychopath could do to me. But at that moment, something awoke in me. I knew I had to fight for my life. I knew I had to do me thing. With all my strength, I managed to hit him in the face, making him recoil momentarily. Taking advantage of that small opening, I got to my feet and ran for the exit. Now that some mirrors were broken, it was easier to find my way. Finally, I found my way out of the House of Mirrors. I staggered out, bleeding and disfigured, but hoping that the clown would not follow me. My relief was short-lived, for as I looked back, I saw the clown standing at the entrance to the house, his ghoulish grin even more terrifying. He seemed to enjoy my suffering. I ran to my friends, who were waiting for me outside, having no idea what I had just experienced. I told them about the nightmare I had experienced inside the House of Mirrors, but no one else seemed to have seen the sinister clown. Needless to say, everyone believed me, since I had my disfigured face as proof. The experience scared me for life. I never went back to any abandoned place, and I am terrified of that movie. The nightmare of the clown was always present in my thoughts. Every time I close my eyes, I see him, laughing at me, pointing at my disfigured face with his grimy fingers. In time, my wounds healed, and barely left me with a few scars. I may look like a normal person on the outside, but inside I'm torn, and I fear I may never heal from it. Thanks for watching. If you like the stories, remember to subscribe and activate the notification bell so you don't miss any other true disturbing stories. See you next video.